I remember when I reviewed the Dark Elf trilogy, so many comments told me, Mike, you're doing it wrong. You're going to regret reading it out of publication order because you're going to go read Icewind Dale and you're going to think it's just so sloppy compared to Dark Elf. Not the case. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back to talk a little Forgotten Realms. Today, guys, we're headed all the way to that icy tundra known as Icewind Dale to talk the Icewind Dale trilogy. This, of course, is Crystal Shard. This is Streams of Silver, and this is the Halfling's Gem. Released between 1988 and 1990, guys. This was the introduction of Drizzt and of course, his faithful sidekick, Guinevere. Now, when I say that, guys, I mean the books, because I know I'll have someone in the comments who's like, well, actually, Guinevere was introduced in the 1982 5e Wizards set. I'm not talking about stuff like that, guys. I'm talking about just the books when it comes down to things like this. But hey, Dungeons & Dragons fans, I love you. I think you guys are just awesome. I love your dedication. So if going by publication order, not timeline order, this is the first introduction to those two very iconic characters that we've come, some of us now, 6 books in, I feel like I could say have come to know and love. But yes, I started with the Dark Elf trilogy. But this was released first. Obviously, this was the introduction to many of these characters. And while I loved the Dark Elf trilogy, I still felt there was a lot of room for improvement. So did Icewind Dale do that? Well, guys, we're going to talk about it. We're going to begin, like usual, with discussing what is this book about. Now, Drizzt has settled in the Windstep towns of Icewind Dale. There he encounters a young barbarian named Wulfgar, captured in a raid and made the ward of a grizzled dwarf named Bruenor. With Drizzt's help, Wulfgar will grow from a feral child to a man with the heart of a dwarf, the instincts of a savage, and the soul of a hero. But it will take even more than that to defeat the demonic power of Crenshinabon, the fabled crystal shard. Drizzt struggles with his own inner voices that call him back to the pitiless depths of the Underdark. But louder still are the voices of his newfound friends, and the dream that drives Bruenor Battlehammer to reclaim Mithril Hall. Time and again, they're told to turn back, that some dreams can never be fulfilled, but they fight on together. Assassin Artemis Intrari whisks his kidnapped victim south into Pasha Pook's vengeful hands. If Pook can control the magical panther Guinevere, a friend will die in a real game of cat and mouse. The companions from Icewind Dale battle pirates on the famed Sword Coast, brave the deserts of Kalimsham, and fight monsters from other planes to rescue their friends and themselves, guys. 1988 through 1990, this is the Icewind Dale trilogy. Now, when we get into the usual, what makes this series good or bad with me, guys, it's the growing cast. Something that I was kind of iffy on with the Dark Elf trilogy was I know that the theme was supposed to be solitude. This was just trying to find his place in the world. A lot of it was traveling on his own, meeting and, finding ways to wear out his welcome, I guess you will, with, a lot of things that aren't going to receive a drow very well above ground. But with this, I feel like you get a new sense of family as Drizzt is kind of thrust into this group here. Now, something I didn't really care for in Dark Elf was the introduction of Catti-brie and Bruenor. I didn't really feel it, and it did really feel like I can tell he's just lining this up so it will match with this original trilogy that he wrote. And I felt like those two characters were kind of rushed to a point where I wasn't really invested in them at all. This book takes her time, and it does do Catti-brie and Bruenor very, very well into a fact where I feel like those are very much loved characters. But I love Drizzt with this group around him, having other characters. I like this as an ensemble cast. I feel like it really flows so much better. We get a little less time, inside Drizzt's head. We get a little more time just getting to know these other characters, how they genuinely care for each other. That's something I really, really do love the theme of friendship in this. And seeing past our normal prejudices to learn to coexist and get along and to learn to love each other. I love those kinds of things. But it's not in like a hokey way. I know some people might think that sounds kind of corny. To me, I love it. I love Drizzt with this new group of friends that he's with. And I just grow to love them all. And like I said, the depth that they give, that Salvatore gives Bruenor Battlehammer and Catti-brie in this, I think it's just wonderful. But the additions of Regis and Wulfgar also kind of round out that group with, of course, Guinevere, who I think needs no introduction, obviously. I think that really just makes this whole fellowship, if you will, really, really just a group that you feel like you could be playing a D&D campaign with and feel like, you know what? we're ready to take on the world, and we got each other's backs. I love that. But yeah, Regis, you will see lots of. Here's one thing about this. Okay, let me put it like this: you will see that Salvatore wears his influences on his sleeve, and I'm namely talking about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, because you'll see Bruenor Battlehammer, and you'll be like, that sounds a lot like Thorin Oakenshield. Regis, wow, that's a lot like Bilbo. Mithril Hall. Is this Erebor? And you'll get lots of things in Streams of Silver that feel very familiar, like a certain book about a certain hobbit you might have read one time. Now, here's the thing. I feel like he does wear those influences on his sleeve, like I said. And you will feel some things that feel familiar. However, they don't feel derivative. This isn't the Sword of Shannara. You're never going to... I don't mean to trash that, because I've given credit to Terry Brooks on this channel numerous times. So calm down if you're a Shannara fan. But go back and read that very first book and replace all those names with Fellowship of the Ring characters' names. And you'll be like, wow, this did seem very familiar. Anyhow, with this, I never felt like that was Streams of Silver. I never felt like it was just a beat-for-beat ripoff of The Hobbit. But I do feel like there's a lot of same beats there. And it seems almost like what Michael J. Sullivan did with Avon Partha. It seems more like a hat tip of respect to a story that was clearly probably influential to R.A. Salvatore. But I love that he gives all these characters times to shine. He doesn't ignore his influences. He doesn't hide from the fact, that he's got, an elf, a man, and a dwarf kind of thing, He doesn't really hide these things, that he's got this stuff. But I love the way that it's done in a way that I care about the characters, because he introduces them in such a different way and gives them kind of their time to shine throughout this trilogy. And the way he does this, I feel like each book in this trilogy is very much it belongs to each character. It belongs to a certain character, rather. Like, I feel like the first book is very much Wulfgar, when you go through his path from a ward to almost like a son to Bruenor Battlehammer there. And then book 2, I think, is very much Bruenor Battlehammer's story about reclaiming his homeland. And book 3, I think, is very much Drizzt's book. I know it's called Halfling's Gem, so a lot of people want to assume is about Regis, and Regis is obviously a very big plot point in that, and a specific little jewel that he wears around his neck. But I think that one is really with Drizzt learning to deal with some of the prejudices of the outside world, learning to accept some things will never change, but sometimes some people can, and really coming to terms with his own inner darkness. There are lots of things when dealing with Artemis and Troy, which I'll get into in a minute, where I feel like he's got to, deal with some things, some darkness, from that crept along with him from the Underdark that really are with him still today, and he has to deal with some of those things. And I think it's handled just really, really great. And of course, Guinevere. I think Guinevere has a moment in this book where I bought this t-shirt after I read it, because Guinevere had a moment in Halfling's Gem that was so good, I actually shouted out loud how good it was. It was so excellent. It was like the moment I've been waiting for. Like, look, if you guys don't know, I love animal companions. I love them to death. And I think Guinevere is one of the most unique I've ever seen because of her skill set, I guess you would call it, the whole spectral plane and an R plane. And there's actual terms for these. I'm just not remembering what they're exactly called. So D&D fans, don't butcher me there. But I love, obviously, the Guinevere. You have me at Animal Companion, honestly. I mean, who isn't going to love a faithful panther as a sidekick, But she has a moment in the third book that's just like, yeah, so good, so good. So I love that even that character, who doesn't have a voice or anything, can still continue to evolve and have really, really great character moments in a series like this. So I love it. I love that he, like I said, he wears his influences on his sleeve. I love that he has no problems just going all in on themes of friendship and love. And then, of course, just the action. Salvatore writes just fantastic action, just in a swashbuckling kind of way, and in a way where you've got Drizzt and this group fighting like groups 3-4 times their size, and feeling like, man, those other guys ain't got a chance versus this group. So do his characters feel OP sometimes? I think, but I think they get their asses kicked a lot too, which is actually kind of surprising, because a lot of times with these kind of traditional fantasy of the time period, like I said about the Tolkien thing, is if you weren't writing Tolkien, you weren't getting published. That's how it was at this time period in fantasy. If you weren't writing something that was reminiscent of Tolkien, you weren't getting published. But I think he takes it a little higher in how much he does up the violence, he does up the action, and he does really up, the body count. I think the body count is quite high, and you don't see that in a lot of traditional fantasy like this. Now, he's not going to describe the innards falling out of people's bodies and stuff for you like some modern fantasy authors will. But, it's also, this isn't like hold your hand PG fantasy. I know that everyone kind of sold me on this. So like, I don't know if reading it at your age, Mike, I don't know, you might not really get what I really enjoyed it because I read it as a preteen, and that's why I really got into it. I don't know this point and in the modern fantasy community where we got to, oh, if fantasy is kind of simple or easy to digest, it's just below me now. I've never been like that. If it's a great story and it has great characters, I don't care about all that. For me, it's character first, and I think he does a great job on his characters. Big one for me is instead of like this villain of the week kind of thing like he had in Dark Elf, you really get a overarching villain in this one that I think is really great, and that's Artemis Entreri. Now, what I love about him is I feel like he's such a great contrast to Drizzt, and that's what makes him an awesome adversary, because whereas Drizzt is the drow with the human morals, I feel like Entreri is very much the human with the drow morals, and I think that just makes them so compelling. So, the whole time, this whole trilogy, you're just waiting for these two to face off, and it happens more than once, put it that way, and it's good stuff. It's good stuff, these two. Every time they're on the page together, their banter is really, really great. The way Salvatore describes their actual conflicts are really, really good. So I love almost that it's like a game of cat and mouse between these two, to a point to where, okay, well, now it's time to cross blades and see what happens. Because I think you will kind of get that idea sometimes that Drizzt feels a little overpowered. Entreri knocks him down a notch more than once. So Entreri is very much a character I think they can hold their own. So I feel like he has a menacing presence, he has a motive, and he has a lot of depth to him that most villains in this series don't so far. Like a lot of the side villains, mustache twirling, whatevers. They're kind of come and go. Where I felt like Entreri was the first one that had a lot of depth to him, and I want to see more out of that character. But I do feel like every character gets their moments, like I said, in this book, in this trilogy. Each time, I talked about the one with Guinevere, but I mean, every character in this group has a moment where you're fist pumping, where you're excited, where you're like, that's it. Or you're feeling their struggle, you're feeling their pain, you're feeling their loss. You do get all those things with these characters. And that, to me, just says he's writing characters really good. So, guys, it's fast-paced, it's never boring, and it's very much a spiritual journey for Drizzt. And lastly, good thing, I still continue to love those little journal entries from Drizzt at the beginning of each one of these parts in these books. And I feel like that's the best way. Okay, for example, Drizzt and Wulfgar are traveling by sea, and it's going to take a few days to get there. What would Drizzt be doing during this time? Oh, it's really simple. He would be writing his inner thoughts in this journal. So I think it's something that's really good. He does kind of keep it pertain to the story, but he also gives like a moral lesson, almost like a He-Man or G.I. Joe, the more you know, G.I. Joe kind of more you know segment or something, to kind of be like, just like a moral lesson. I think it's really, really good. I love the way that he does it. And Drizzt is there's a reason they just released that Tao of Drizzt book collecting all these, because they're very good. They're very, very good. They never take you out of the story, but they do give you a nice breather as an intermission between some of these big, epic fantasy set pieces I love. So, is it all good? No, of course not. There's never a perfect set of books. With me in this trilogy, one thing I don't like, and I feel like this is more traditional fantasy than of that time period than it is Salvatore here. I don't like the fake out deaths. I can think of at least 3 times where he wants you to believe a major character is dead in this, and then they're back, and it's like, how? I'm like, just because, and that happens. That happens in traditional fantasy. It's kind of frustrating, when you feel like, okay, well, it feels like a little too much plot armor for our characters there, but then you'll also be happy that, I'm glad that character's not dead, though, so you kind of get that. I think ever since Fly You Fools, traditional fantasy was always kind of doing that, finding a way to bring back a major character. So it's not that big of a deal, but it was something that was like, okay, I had totally settled in that this character was dead, and it was like, oh, it was a fake out. And so it got to the point to where when it happened after that, I was like, they're not dead. I ain't buying that for a second. But some of the villains, like I said, kind of mustache twirly. Besides Entreri, I couldn't even tell you half of their names at this point. There's a lot of scheming wizards and things like that. It's been a bit now since I read Crystal Shard, so I can't remember the one who actually finds Grin Shittabon and gets up to a lot of fuckery. But that guy, he was okay, but it was never one that was like, this is going to be an all-time character for me. Like I said, I can't even remember his name. So that's how much I think of a lasting impact they made. So I like all the creatures, all the ghouls, all the beasties. That's all a lot of fun. But a lot of the scheming humans and wizards and stuff, they're kind of in one ear and out the other for me, even though they do have cool things, like the one who basically sends them to another realm in the 3rd book. So there's some exciting things that do happen with this stuff, and I feel like that's kind of more if you are a major D&D player, you might actually understand some of these things. Some of the plot points are left open. However, I do know, obviously, this is an ongoing series. This is book number 4, 5, and 6 of lots of books. I don't even know exactly what number of Drizzt books he's on now. So I know that all these things weren't going to be wrapped up here. He wants to leave some plot threads hanging. And you could tell basically the whole last chapter of Halfling's Gem was just setting up the next trilogy, that's actually a 4-book series, which I am excited to read here very, very soon. Now, I will say that I don't think Salvatore's prose is going to knock you over. It's one of those things where I feel like his character works good. His action is great. He's not going to knock you over with his prose and his world building. Now, look, with the world building, can you blame him? He's playing in someone else's sandbox. Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons is already a thing. So I don't think you're going to expect too much increased world building in these books. I'm sure he'll add his own things too, but a lot of the stuff I feel like is pre-existing, and if you want to, you can go to the Dungeons & Dragons wiki and you can read about these things, so it gives you that option if you want to do that. He's not going to hit you with this 200 pages of lore like a modern fantasy book will. So some people consider that a good thing, some people consider that a bad thing. I don't know where you stand, but yeah, that's it. I think it makes it more accessible to read for all ages, really, but I know some people have gotten to the point in their life where they're like, I'm above fantasy like that now. I need to know every single thing about how everything works. So if you need to know how the sausage are made, it might bother you. If you don't, you're like me, you're just wanting to have a good time with a palate cleanser series, I don't think it'll bother you so much. So how about why should you guys read it? Now look, incredibly low commitment and highly accessible. I think anyone from a preteen to my age or older could be reading these books and having a good time with them. I don't know at what point simplistic fantasy, as I've heard it described as, became a bad thing. Sometimes it's fun to go back to those roots and remember why it is we love this genre in the first place. And I feel like that's what Salvatore is doing with this series, is he's going back to the things that he loved when he was younger and saying, hey, this was a good time when I was younger, and I think it can still be a good time at this age. And I think he proves that. And it's low commitment, like I said, because each book is they're like 350 pages, guys. They're not that long. You can fly through them really quick. They're super, super just like breakneck pacing. They slow down when they need to slow down to give us those character moments, but they are very, very fast paced. They're page turners. You're never, ever going to be a point like, oh, I'm really slogging through this book. I never felt like this. 6 books now, I've never felt like I was slogging through anything. If you're into the whole group of friends questing, I think that's always going to be a lot of fun for you. Like the first book, you have your big, huge, epic defending our land kind of thing. And then the second and third book, I think you have your questing. And then I guess the second book's mostly your quest, third book's kind of like your rescue, but it has the quest involved in there as well. So I think you're going to find a little bit of everything that you loved about fantasy in these books. And they're just fun action books with incredibly likable characters and one of the best, obviously, animal companions of all time. I think you're going to have a blast with them. So how about my final thoughts, guys? Look, I had a blast with this trilogy. I think they're 2 for 2 for me now. Reading this after Dark Elf was fine. I actually liked this better than the Dark Elf trilogy. A lot of people told me his writing style was so much better by the time he did Dark Elf. I never once reading these books felt like, oh God, that sentence didn't land for me. But like I said, I'm not a prose snob, so maybe that might have something to do with it. I'm not really sure. Never really bothered me at all, but I grew to love that entire group. I like this story as an ensemble. I like getting more than just Drizzt, even though obviously Drizzt is my favorite. He is my favorite, but I love all these little side characters here. I think they are all great. They all bring something a little different to the table. And I didn't even talk about it. I think that one thing I love about Caddy Bree is she doesn't feel like she's just there to be a damsel or, the eye candy or the love interest for someone else. She's very capable. And I think that's something that at this time period, that was very forward thinking, and I'm glad that he has these things in here. They're really, really, all these characters are just so enjoyable, guys. So I see this trilogy a lot lower, and a lot of Drizzt fans like power rankings, if you will. And if that's the case, man, this is going to be a top 10 fantasy series all time for me. So I'm having a blast with it. I think it is the perfect palate cleanser series to read in between big, huge, epic fantasy reads. I'm having a blast with this world. Cannot wait to see where it goes. I'm very, very excited to start Legacy of the Drow next, because I knew there is a certain Spider Queen that Drizzt has a little unfinished business with, and I'm anxious to see how that resolves. So guys, that was the Icewind Dale trilogy. If you've been apprehensive about giving Legend of Drizzt a try because of how many books there are, it's so easy to break these up into little arcs, because he does trilogy, quadrilogy, trilogy, just like I kind of said about the Robin Hobb books, but these books read a lot faster than Robin Hobb books. So I think if you've been apprehensive about that for that reason, don't fret. It has such good stopping points where you can stop and take huge breaks in between. But these books read so quick, guys. It's very much just like my Dresden Files replacement right now in this. I need that quick read that's still highly enjoyable with characters that I love in between these huge reads. I think it's just a great plan, and I can't wait to continue. So guys, drop in the comments, let me know what you think about the Icewind Dale trilogy. Have you tried it? Are you still not really interested? Are you curious about it? I think maybe you should go ahead and give it a try, and I would love to talk to you about it. So drop in the comments, guys, and I will talk to you there.